Hey guys, tonight we're heading out where the grass runs forever. The sky is too big to measure, and the only thing louder than the wind is the sound of your own horse breathing beneath you. It's dawn on the prairie, a cool blue light spilling over the horizon, and somewhere out there, silhouetted against the rising sun, a few riders are already moving the herd. What you might not realize is that many of those riders, maybe 1 in 4 by some accounts, are black cowboys. You don't often see them in old movies. Hollywood preferred its cowboys dusty, drawling, and uniformly white. But in the decades after the Civil War, when cattle country was booming and the great drives from Texas to Kansas were the lifeblood of the frontier, thousands of African American men and women were working the saddle, roping, branding, cooking, and keeping the herds alive through heat, rain, and snow. Their stories are quieter, tucked away in diaries, letters, and a few rare photographs. Tonight, we're going to ride alongside them. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in the half light, reins in your hand, your breath visible in the cool morning air. The smell of horses and campfire coffee lingers. The embers still glow in the ring of stones where the cook kept the beans warm through the night. A coyote calls once, far to the east, and the sound seems to roll away over miles of grass. Your horse shifts under you, and you pat its neck, feeling the warmth through its short, glossy coat. The other riders, some young, some with faces carved by wind and years, sit in easy silence, waiting for the trail boss's signal. You notice the range of skin tones in the group, and you remember something a historian once said. The West was more diverse than its myths. It had to be. Survival doesn't care who you are, only whether you can do the work. Mainstream fact. It's estimated that 1/4 of the working cowboys in the late 19th century were black, many of them formerly enslaved people who moved west after emancipation. They brought with them skills in horse handling, farming, and livestock care, often learned the hard way, and adapted them to the demands of the open range. The trail boss rides up, a tall man with a battered hat, his coat patched at the elbows. He gives a small nod, and the column begins to move, hooves muffled by the dew-wet grass. You've fallen behind a rider named Elijah, his hat brim shadowing a face with the faintest grin. His horse is a deep chestnut with a white blaze. The two move together like they've shared 100 dawns. Quirky tidbit. Some cowboys swore that horses could recognize the sound of their rider's boots on the ground, and would nicker softly before the rider even touched the reins. Elijah leans over and says his mare, Daisy, will only start moving if she hears his whistle. A high, slow note that sounds like the wind slipping through a fence. The herd is spread out ahead, heads down, tails swishing. Cattle aren't glamorous in the morning. They shuffle, they pause, they chew. But you know these animals are the reason for the ride. They'll be driven hundreds of miles, crossing rivers, threading through canyons, and skirting towns where supplies can be bought and news exchanged. Historians still argue whether the life of a cowboy was mostly hardship or mostly freedom. Some accounts emphasize the low pay, the long hours, and the constant danger. Others focus on the sense of independence, the open sky, and the camaraderie of the trail. The truth, as always, likely sat somewhere in between. One day a grind of mud and mosquitoes, the next a sunset you never forget. You ride on, the sun climbing slowly behind you. The world around is still waking. Meadowlarks call from fence posts. The grass sighs under the wind, and every so often the metallic jingle of spurs punctuates the rhythm of hooves. The air smells faintly of sage and dust, a scent you think you could carry in your mind forever. Ata Creek crossing, the riders pause. Elijah swings down, cups water in his hands, and drinks. Daisy dips her nose into the shallows, blowing bubbles like a child playing. You feel the cool dampness rising from the water and think about the miles ahead. The trail boss raises a hand, points north, and the drive begins in earnest. The cattle move as one great breathing body, and the riders spread out to keep the line. You shift in your saddle, feeling the creak of leather, the weight of the day just beginning. Somewhere in the rhythm of it, the sway of the horse, the muted calls between riders, the soft push of wind, you find a strange kind of calm. The prairie stretches in every direction, and you realize this is the canvas on which these stories were painted, broad, open, and too easily erased by time. You ride on, the trail still wet from the dawn dew, and as the sun rises higher you start to think about how each man here, black, white, Mexican, has a story that stretches far beyond this cattle drive. For the black Cowboys, many of those stories begin in bondage, with memories of fields and overseers that were never truly left behind, even out here on the open range. The saddle beneath you creaks, the wind tugs at your hat brim, and Elijah rides close enough for you to see the faint scarring on his wrists. He doesn't speak about them, but you've heard from another rider how he was born enslaved in Louisiana, learned to handle horses on the plantation, and then, when emancipation came, followed the cattle trails into Texas to find work where the only measure was whether you could keep up with the herd. Mainstream fact. After the Civil War ended in 1865, many formerly enslaved people sought work in the West. Texas, with its booming cattle industry and shortage of experienced labor, became a major draw. Skills in animal husbandry, learned under harsh conditions, translated directly into valuable cowboy expertise. The sun climbs and warms the leather of your reins. You imagine the shift that must have come for those like Elijah, trading the cramped fields and overseers for the endless horizon and a trail boss who didn't care about skin color so long as the work got done. But even in this wide-open land, prejudice wasn't left behind. In some towns, black Cowboys had to eat outside or find lodging away from their white counterparts. On the trail, though, necessity leveled the field. Quirky tidbit. Some ranchers believed black Cowboys were particularly skilled at calming nervous cattle because of their steady singing voices. There are accounts of herds soothed at night by low, rhythmic tunes, half lullaby, half prayer, drifting across the grass. Elijah starts humming one now. You can't place the song, but it's steady even, like the rocking gait of your horse. The cattle's ears twitch, and you'd swear the nearest steer slows its steps just a little. Historians still argue whether the open range was a place of true equality, or simply a temporary truce born of shared hardship. Pay records show that black Cowboys often earned the same wages as their white peers for the same work. $30 a month was common, but letters and diaries tell of tensions that simmered just under the surface, ready to flare in town or in moments of strain. As the day warms, you pass a windmill turning lazily, its blades creaking. Beside it is a small shack where an older cowboy named Isaiah tends to a few spare horses. He waves, his hands rough and scarred from years of roping. Isaiah's story is one of the few you've heard from the man himself. How he walked away from the cotton fields in Arkansas, followed the railroad west until it ended, then hired on to drive cattle north. He says the first time he saw snow was on the trail, a thin white veil over the Texas grass, and he'd laughed so hard the trail boss thought he'd lost his mind. Now, decades later, he's seen snow so deep it swallowed fence posts. Your horse flicks its ears, catching a change in the wind. The air smells faintly of rain. Somewhere ahead, a dark cloud smudges the horizon. You and Elijah exchange a glance. You'll need to reach camp before the weather turns. Joke one comes from Elijah as he pats Daisy's neck. She can smell rain 3 days out, but tell her to hurry and she'll stop for a nap. Daisy, true to form, slows her pace just enough to make you wonder if she understood him. The trail winds over a rise, and for a moment you see the whole herd spread out like a river of hides and horns. You think about how many of the men steering it forward, quiet, steady, and largely absent from dime novels, carried the double weight of hard labor and a history that the frontier didn't erase, but perhaps softened in places. The sun beats down, your canteen grows lighter, and the air hums with insects. Ahead, the camp smoke curls up, a thin gray ribbon against the bright sky. You'll have coffee soon, and maybe a story or two before the next stretch of miles. By the time you ride into camp, the smell of wood smoke and boiling coffee has wrapped itself around the place like a well-worn blanket. The chuck wagon's iron pots hiss softly, and the cook, broad-shouldered, with a red kerchief tied loosely around his neck, gives you a nod without breaking his rhythm of stirring. You slide off your horse, feeling that familiar, momentary sway in your legs as the ground feels too still after hours in the saddle. Texas, just after the Civil War, was a place teetering between ruin and opportunity. The Confederacy had collapsed, and much of the state's wealth was tied up in cattle that roamed almost wild, unclaimed in the brush country. There were more longhorns than anyone knew what to do with, but the railroads hadn't yet reached far into the South. The solution was as vast and exhausting as the land itself. Gather the herds and drive them north to the railheads in Kansas, where eastern markets would pay top dollar. Mainstream fact, between the late 1860s and the mid-1880s, millions of cattle were driven up the Chisholm Trail and other routes from Texas into Kansas. These drives could last months, and each one required a team of seasoned riders to keep hundreds or thousands of animals moving steadily toward their destination. That's where the black Cowboys came in. Many had the skills, the stamina, and, perhaps most importantly, the will to take on such grueling work. As the state tried to rebuild, ranch owners and trail bosses hired whoever could get the job done, and that meant a lot of newly freed men found themselves in the saddle, miles from the places they'd been bound to only a few years before. Quirky tidbit. There's a persistent trail legend that the first herd up the Chisholm after the war included a chuck wagon cook named Sugarfoot Daniels, who supposedly baked biscuits so good they could stop a stampede. Whether that's true or just campfire bragging, the cook here swears by a lump of sourdough starter he keeps wrapped in oilcloth, like a family heirloom. You settle near the fire with Elijah and a couple of others. Tin cups of coffee are passed around, the dark liquid strong enough to wake a stone. Conversation drifts easily between talk of weather, cattle, and which towns up the trail have the friendliest saloons. Historians still argue whether the post-war cattle boom was a genuine economic equalizer or just another frontier phase where marginalized people were used for the hardest jobs until the work ran out. For a brief span, though, the demand for skilled hands was so high that a man's race mattered less than his ability to keep cattle alive and moving. From where you sit, you can see the herds spread out beyond the rise, some lying down, others grazing lazily. A couple of younger riders are posted at the edges, their silhouettes still against the brightening sky. Somewhere out there, a calf bawls for its mother, and the sound carries far in the thin morning air. The cook ladles out beans thick with chunks of salt pork, drops a biscuit on the side, and moves to the next plate. Elijah leans over and says, "Eat up now. Could be we won't stop again till sundown." You take his advice, the biscuit flaky and faintly sweet, the beans warm enough to chase away the morning chill still caught in your bones. Joke 1 comes when another cowboy, a wiry man named Amos, stirs his coffee with a fork and says, "I like to chew it, not drink it." The chuckwagon cook rolls his eyes but says nothing, he's heard it before. When the plates are cleaned and the coffee pot drained, the camp comes alive again. Horses are saddled, bedrolls packed, and the cook's gear stowed back on the wagon. The trail boss checks his watch chain and gives the signal, and just like that, the quiet of camp dissolves into motion. You swing into the saddle, the leather warm from the sun. Ahead, the trail curves toward a low line of hills, their slopes dotted with mesquite. You know that by nightfall, those hills will be behind you, and the herd will be a little closer to Kansas, pulled forward by men whose names won't make it into the storybooks, but whose work carved the path all the same. The trail today cuts wide across a flat, open stretch, the grass shimmering under the steady sun. The herd moves at a stubborn, unhurried pace, hundreds of broad backs swaying in imperfect rhythm, tails flicking at flies. Out here, with nothing to break the horizon but the occasional mesquite tree, it's easy to forget that even in this vastness, there's a strict order to things. You ride up toward the front where the trail boss sits his horse like he was born there. His name's McAllister, and though he says little, his eyes miss nothing. Next to him is his segundo, the second in command, keeping a quiet tally of riders and cattle in his head. Below them in rank are the seasoned hands, and below them, the greenhorns, fresh faces who still think the West will hand them adventure and glory for the asking. Mainstream fact, on a typical cattle drive, the trail boss oversaw the entire operation, choosing the route, setting the pace, and making the final call in emergencies. Black cowboys could and did serve in all positions, though they were more often found among the seasoned hands or as top wranglers in charge of the remuda, the spare horses. Elijah rides beside you for a while before angling off to check a slow-moving section of the herd. He's trusted to keep order without being told where to go. That's the mark of a good hand. Further back, you spot Isaiah moving in tandem with a younger rider, showing him how to hold position without crowding the cattle. Quirky tidbit. Some trail bosses swore they could pick a good cowboy in under a minute just by watching how he held the reins. Loose and easy, but never sloppy. That was the sign of someone who knew how to guide without forcing. Elijah's got it, and even Daisy, his mare, seems to read the herd's mood before it turns into trouble. The greenhorns, of course, have their own learning curve. One, a boy from St. Louis, rides with his hat tipped too far back, squinting into the sun. Another still sits too stiff in the saddle, every jolt a surprise. It's no kindness, but the old hands mostly leave them to figure it out. Better to make mistakes now, when the herd is calm, than in the middle of a river crossing or a night stampede. Historians still argue whether trail life offered real upward mobility for black cowboys, or if the glass ceiling of the times followed them even here. Pay was often equal, but leadership roles were less frequently offered, and a man might be trusted with the herd's safety without being trusted to sign the contracts that paid for it.by mid-morning. The order of the drive is running like a clock. The lead steers keep their steady course, the flank riders maintain the line, and the drag riders, positioned at the very back, push the stragglers forward while eating more than their fair share of dust. You're somewhere in the middle, where the air is clearer, but the hum of the herd is constant. Joke 1 comes from Amos again, riding past with a handkerchief tied around his face to block the dust. This is why I keep my teeth, so I can chew the grit before I swallow it. Elijah just shakes his head. The trail boss makes a small gesture to the remuda riders, and they peel off to check the spare horses. Those horses, rested, watered, and rotated in, are the drive's quiet lifeline. A cowboy might go through 3 mounts in a single day if the work is hard. The remuda itself is kept just far enough from the herd to avoid spooking it, and the wranglers know each animal by sight and habit. By the time the sun is high, you've covered more miles than you realized. The landscape begins to change. Small gullies cut into the earth, clusters of prickly pear breaking up the grassland. You think about how each man here slots into the rhythm of the drive, how their unspoken roles keep the whole machine moving. Out here, hierarchy isn't just for show, it's survival. The trail boss calls for a short halt, and the herd settles into grazing. Riders dismount to stretch their legs, refill canteens, and adjust gear. McAllister stays in the saddle, scanning the horizon with a squint, already thinking 2 days ahead. You realize that even in this still moment, the order never stops working. It's just breathing in before the next push forward. When the halt ends, you swing back into the saddle and feel the leather settle under you like it's been there 100 years. The sun is still climbing, but the heat hasn't peaked yet, and the herd is moving at a lazy but steady pace. Out here, the days are long, but each has its own rhythm. Coffee at first light, a slow build toward the mid-morning push, a lull around noon, and then that second wind as shadows start to stretch in the afternoon. Today's route is a little kinder, with more grass underfoot and a light breeze that keeps the flies from swarming too thick. Elijah rides up beside you, tipping his hat with a faint grin. "This is the easy part," he says. "Don't get used to it." Mainstream fact: on a long cattle drive, a typical day could cover anywhere from 10 to 20 miles, depending on terrain, weather, and the condition of the herd. The goal wasn't speed, it was keeping the cattle healthy, well-fed, and calm enough to avoid trouble. You watch the line of riders and cattle stretching out ahead and behind. The sound is a constant low music, the soft thud of hooves, the jingle of tack, the occasional call from a rider to nudge a steer back in line. Somewhere to your right, Isaiah is working the flank, his posture loose but his eyes sharp. Quirky tidbit: black cowboys were often prized for their ability to keep watch over the herd at night. Their steady voices, singing work songs, hymns, or just wordless tunes, were thought to calm the cattle and reduce the risk of a stampede. Some swore a good night horse could learn the songs, too, pricking its ears when the melody shifted. The trail boss moves past, scanning the ground for signs of trouble. Deep hoof prints where the soil is soft, a stray steer grazing too far from the line. He gives a short whistle and 2 riders peel off to guide it back. The movements are small, efficient, almost invisible unless you're looking for them. Historians still argue whether the camaraderie of the trail was as genuine as later accounts suggest. Some claim the mix of backgrounds, black, white, Mexican, native, created a rare space where skill outweighed prejudice. Others point to letters and memoirs that show how the old divisions persisted, even when survival depended on cooperation. By late morning, the sun is full overhead, casting sharp shadows under the horses' bellies. The air feels heavier, and the herd's pace slows. McAllister calls for another short halt, letting the cattle graze in place. Riders dismount, stretch their legs, and check cinches. Amos, predictably, uses the break to try another joke. "I've been thinking, if we tied feed bags to their heads, we could drive them in our sleep." Elijah tells him that's fine so long as he's the one holding the rope when the steers get ideas. You take a drink from your canteen, the water already lukewarm, and wipe the dust from your face with your sleeve. In the stillness, you hear the soft rustle of grass, the quiet grind of hooves, and somewhere, far off, a hawk's cry cutting through the heat. When the trail boss signals, You mount again and feel the shift as the herd gathers itself. This is the part of the day when the light changes, the colors flatten, and the heat sits on you like an extra blanket. Your horse's breathing slows to match the herd's, the steady rhythm making time feel unpinned, and you think, maybe this is what draws men back to the trail year after year. The work is hard, the pay isn't much, and the comforts are few, but there's something in the measured pace, the quiet, and the sense that you are exactly where you're supposed to be. By the time the sun begins its slow arc downward, the herd has settled into that easy, loping movement that only comes when both cattle and riders have found their rhythm. The trail feels almost like a living thing beneath you, a broad ribbon of dust and hoofprints threading through the prairie. The wind has shifted, cooler now, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and distant water. The day's work isn't over, not by a long shot. You'll ride until the light dips low enough that the shadows start to sprawl across the grass. But for now there's a moment where the heat has eased and the air feels generous. Elijah calls out from a few lengths ahead. Tonight we sleep under a blanket of stars you can't find in any city. Mainstream fact: on a cattle drive, cowboys rarely slept in tents. Most simply rolled out their bedrolls under the open sky, using their saddles as pillows and their coats for warmth. This not only kept them close to the herd in case of trouble, but also reduced the weight and bulk of camp gear. As the herd grazes at a slow walk, you start thinking about the night ahead. When the day's miles are covered, the cattle will be allowed to rest in a loose circle, watched over by night riders who take turns in shifts. Those not on watch will stretch out on the ground, boots still on, ready to move if the call comes. Quirky tidbit: some cowboys swore that lying flat under the stars for weeks at a time made their eyesight sharper. Others claimed it gave them stranger dreams, visions of stampedes that hadn't happened yet, or of faraway places they'd never seen. Elijah says he once dreamed of a green ocean where the waves were made of grass, and woke to find the herd quietly milling around him in the moonlight. The sun continues to sink, painting the horizon in slow-burning colors: rust, gold, and the faintest lavender. The trail boss calls a halt and points toward a slight rise in the land where the chuck wagon is already setting up. You ride in with the rest, feeling the day's dust in your throat and on your skin. Historians still argue whether the open range gave cowboys a kind of freedom they couldn't find anywhere else, or whether it was just another kind of confinement, endless miles and hard work, bound not by fences but by the demands of the herd. The truth, as always, may be somewhere in between. At camp, the smell of supper hangs heavy in the air, beans again, with a side of cornbread and thick slices of salt pork. The cook ladles your portion without a word, and you take a seat on the ground next to Elijah. The first bite is salty, smoky, and exactly what your body has been waiting for. Amos ambles by, coffee cup in hand, and says, "Careful with that cornbread. Last time I bit into a piece this hard, I thought I'd cracked a tooth." The cook glares, and Amos grins, satisfied with his own joke. The night's watch is assigned, and you draw second shift, which means you'll get some hours of rest before midnight. You unroll your bed near the edge of camp, the grass cool beneath you, and watch the sky deepen from blue to black. Stars blink into view by the dozen, then by the hundred, until the heavens are thick with them. In the distance, the cattle settle with low, rumbling sounds, the kind of noise that feels more like a vibration in your chest than something you hear. Somewhere beyond the herd, a coyote calls again, its voice stretched thin across the dark. You pull your coat tighter, close your eyes, and breathe in the dry, clean air of the range. Sleep won't take long to find you here. Second shift passes and you wake to the soft scuff of hooves and the milky sky of almost morning. Your horse lifts her head from the grass and looks at you like a friend who's learned your schedule better than you have. She nudges your shoulder once, gentle, insistent, and you're on your feet before the chill can settle in your bones. Out here, the line between you and your mount blurs. You start to move like a pair of ideas that decided to share one body. Elijah is already up, rubbing Daisy's forehead in slow circles. "Mornin'," he says, voice rasped thin by night air. Daisy flicks an ear at you, then presses her nose into Elijah's palm and exhales. A warm fog in the dim light. You run a hand down your mare's neck and feel the tiny twitches that mean she's listening, skin shivering under your touch as if your fingers are a kind of language. Mainstream fact: the best night horses on 19th century drives were chosen for their calm, their sure-footedness, and their memory. Cowboys often rode the same horse on night watch so the animal learned the shape of the herd, the lilt of the rider's songs, and the meaning of a light pressure on the reins. Many remudas mixed Mustangs, Spanish stock, and early quarter horse types, smallish, tough animals with hearts far larger than their chests. You cinch the saddle by habit, the gentle tug, the pause, the second tug after your mare breathes out like a trickster. She gives you the offended look of someone caught in an old prank. "Nice try," you tell her. She blinks. "Which is horse for you when this one down on the ridge?" Isaiah checks a gelding's hoof by the feel of it more than the look. He runs a thumb along the frog, brushes out a pebble with the pocket knife he keeps sharper than his stories, and sets the hoof down carefully. "An ounce of pebble is a pound of limp," he mutters. You like how horse math works. Quirky tidbit: some cowboys braided horsehair into hatbands or quartz for luck, swearing that a little of a good horse's spirit rode with you in the plate. Others tucked a sliver of their mount's hoof inside a watch fob, as if time itself might run truer with a horse's step inside it. You've seen Elijah's band, black and chestnut strands woven tight enough to hold the horizon. When the light strengthens, the camp shakes itself awake, coffee pot breathing hard, wagon wheels creaking. You walk your mare to the remuda and let her graze nose to nose with a gray that once tried to bite the moon during a thunderstorm. They bumped shoulders like old rivals agreeing to a truce. Horses keep ledgers you can't read, but you know when the debts are settled. Ears soften, tails go quiet. Historians still argue whether black cowboys brought distinct training traditions west or simply adapted regional methods already blended from Mexican vaquero, indigenous, and southern plantation horsemanship. The record is scattered: memoirs, ranch tallies, a few photographs. But every page hums with the same refrain: patience first, force last. You see it daily in the way Elijah asks before he tells, and Daisy answers before she's asked. You swing up and head for the edge of the herd with the easy sway your mare knows as well as your heartbeat. The cattle are slow as biscuits this hour, drifting like a brown river that forgot where it was supposed to hurry. Your horse watches them with one ear and keeps the other on you, adjusting her stride a hoof length at a time so you skim the flank and nudge a wandering steer back with nothing but presence. You swear you did nothing. Your horse did everything. That's usually how the best rides work. Joke one comes when Amos trots past, hat tilted, and says, "If my horse gets any smarter, I'll have to split my pay with him." Without breaking stride, his bay snorts as if to say about time. A young greenhorn, stiff in the saddle, fights the reins like he's arguing law. His horse tosses its head, annoyed. Elijah angles over and speaks not to the boy but to the horse first. "Easy now," then shows the rider how to let the leather lie on his fingers instead of choke them. "You ain't dragging a steer," Elijah says. "You're shaking hands." The pair settles, and the horse blows out a breath. The trademark horse okay, fine. That loosens the whole morning. Mainstream fact, quiet but true, vaquero gear influenced nearly everything about a working cowboy's kit. Spanish bits and curb chains, rawhide reins, high cantle saddles for long hours, and saddle horns built to dally a rope. Black cowboys used the same tack and often excelled at riata handling, branding, and doctoring, jobs that kept a crew from falling apart on the hard days. You stop to adjust a slip latigo and see the pale scar that rings the leather where it's been cinched 1,000 times. The saddle skirts smell like sun-warmed oil. The blanket's sweat salt has dried in a map of yesterday's miles. Your mare leans her hip into you like a friend in a crowded room. Sometimes the best conversation is just weight answered with weight. Quirky tidbit. Tobacco Jews showed up in more barnside cures than any doctor would recommend. Dabbed on a tick bite, rubbed into a rope burn, even swiped across a cracked hoof in a pinch. Isaiah swears it once scared a splinter out by sheer meanness. You prefer pine pitch and clean water, but the trail keeps its own pharmacy. By late morning, the herd noses toward a creek. Horses hear the water before you do. Their steps pick up, ears flicking like compass needles. You loosen the reins, let your mare lower her head into the shallows. She drinks, breathes rippling the skin of the creek, then curls her lips back to grin at you. A flamin' response that always looks like your horse is laughing at your hat. Joke 2 is easy. Fine, go on, roast my fashion. She flicks her tail and pretends innocence. You check hoofs again on the far bank. A sliver of shale has wedged itself under the left fore. Your mare shifts, patient as a prayer, while you pry it free with the pick and smooth the edges with the thumb. You've learned to read soreness the way you read weather, by the almosts. Almost a head bob, almost a short step. You fix almosts before they become now. Historians still argue whether particular mounts became famous on drives the way human hands did. There are a few named in memoirs: Smoky, Blue, Molly, Comanche. But most horse legends stayed local, told at fires and forgotten by ledgers. You decide, not for the first time, that every good horse deserves a ballad, even if the only audience is the dark. Around midday, the remuda riders swing through with fresh mounts for those who need them. You keep your mare. She's still fresh, and you owe her the satisfaction of finishing the stretch she started. Elijah swaps Daisy for a compact dun that moves like a rumor. Daisy'll nap through a stampede if you let her. He jokes, then adds softer. Saved me once on the Salt Fork by picking her own line. I just sat quiet and tried not to be the dumbest thing on the river. Mainstream fact again. River crossings were where horse sense paid rent. A mount that hesitated, panicked, or tried to climb another horse could turn a crossing into chaos. The best night horses were often the best river horses too, unflappable, quick to find footing, quicker to forgive a clumsy cue. The afternoon stretches, and you ease a sore spot under the saddle by shifting your weight, standing in the stirrups for a few breaths, then settling back down. Your mare appreciates the courtesy. She shortens a stride, then lengthens it again to tell you she noticed. Communication is a long braid of tiny trades like that. Quirky tidbit again. Some hands cut small notches in a rein, one for each 100 miles a pair had ridden together. Superstition, maybe, or a way to make a private map. You run a finger over your reins and think about carving the first mark. Then you remember the old saying, let good luck sleep. You leave the leather hole and add your mile to memory instead. By evening, the herd slows and the lamps of camp, really just the low orange eyes of the fire, wink through the grass. You swing down, run a cloth over your mare's neck, and slip her the heel of a biscuit the cook pretends not to see you steal. She crunches it and leans her forehead into your chest until your heart thuds against bone. It feels like a handshake sign on both sides. Joke 3 arrives when Amos strolls by and says, "Careful, treat her like that and she'll be writing letters home about you." Your mare flicks an ear. You tell Amos if she learns to write, she's taking over the ledger and probably getting everyone a raise. Night gathers. The first star pops like a pinprick in silk. You coil your rope and hang it where dew won't stiffen it by morning. Your mare rolls, grunts, gets up satisfied, and shakes dust into a small galaxy around her. You spread your bedroll close enough to hear her chew. That's the lullaby you prefer. Grass torn, jaws working, the rhythm of a horse at peace. Before sleep folds over you, you think of all the unnamed horses that carry men like Elijah across the long miles, through rain, dust, river, and the stubborn middle of the day. Historians can argue the training lineages and the pace scales and the percentages. Out here, the math is simpler. One rider, one horse, one herd that needs both. You pat your mare's shoulder once in the dark. She answers with a breath that says, "I'm here." That's enough. You wake to the sound of a lid clinking back onto an iron pot, and the smell of bacon translating the morning into a language every stomach speaks. The camp is still mostly a rumor. Bedrolls hump the ground like small hills. Horses crop the dew from the far edge of the creek. But the chuck wagon is alive, lanterns swinging from its hook, fire boxing a square of orange into the gray. If the drive has a heartbeat, it's the cook's spoon knocking the rim of a Dutch oven. The wagon itself is a practical miracle, a wooden chest on wheels with drawers, cubbies, hooks, and a fold-down workboard that flips into a little kitchen wherever it halts. Sacks of flour and beans are tucked like sleeping cats into the belly. Coffee, sugar, and salt ride higher in lidded tins. Skillets nest. Spoons hang. And wrapped in oilcloth like a relic, the starter, sourdough older than half the crew, rests in a stoneware jar. The cook pats it once, as if to greet an old friend, then lifts the lid and smiles at the faint alive smell. Mainstream fact: by the late 1860s, Charles Goodnight's design popularized the chuck wagon as the mobile kitchen of the cattle drive. The chuck box. At the back, organized tools and staples so a single cook, often a highly skilled black cowboy, could feed a dozen men under almost any sky. Many cooks were veterans of plantation kitchens or army details. On the trail, they became logisticians, quartermasters, medics, and referees, all while turning beans into something that tasted like comfort. Today's cook, folks call him king, moves with the unhurried precision of someone whose mistakes are public and whose triumphs arrive hot. He's got a red kerchief faded to the color of late watermelon, and a scar on his left knuckle shaped exactly like Texas. You've watched him doctor coffee with eggshells to settle the grounds and throw a handful of clean pebbles into a pot so the boil won't slop over. Now he leans the skillet so bacon fat kisses the pan's lip, then slides in a scoop of yesterday's cooled beans, letting them sizzle until their edges turn crisp. Quirky tidbit: some trail cooks kept a single, lucky, spoon they wouldn't let anyone else touch. King's is a long-handled hickory thing worn thin at the business end, with a notch the size of a thumbnail cut out decades ago. He says it lets the gravy whisper past without getting offended. No one laughs, mostly because the gravy obeys. The biscuits begin like weather, a sift of flour that floats, a pinch of salt that glitters, a fist of lard folded with two knives until the bowl looks like a snowfall freckled with pebbles. King hollows a well in the center, pours in that living sour, and draws the dry into the wet with a sideways patience. He doesn't need so much as a nudge. Dough asks nicely, then punishes you for pride. When the mass just holds together, he pats it thick with two hands, cuts rounds with a tin mug. Twist once, never twice. and nests them into a black Dutch oven whose lid wears a crown of coals like a small, hot moon. Historians still argue whether the chuckwagon cook really outranked the trail boss in camp. The stories insist the cook set mealtimes, chose night herd rotations, and banished loudmouths from his fire. Pay scales suggest trail bosses won that contest on paper, but diaries read like a concession. Cross the cook and you cross your comfort, your coffee, and your chances at seconds. Elijah drifts in, drawn by smell and perhaps by destiny. Daisy flickers in his wake to the water trough. "Mornin', King," he says. King doesn't look up. "Mornin', Elijah. I've got biscuits thinking about you. Mind your hat, ain't seasoning." He points the hickory wand at your head too, just in case you thought leaning against the board was an option. The rule around the box is simple. Don't touch, don't sit, don't set anything down where flour is trying to be the best version of itself. You offer to help by grinding coffee. King nods you toward the mill. The beans crack in the grinder with a noise like distant hail. The smell rises and salts the air with wakefulness. When you bring back the grounds, King taps the pot's edge 3 times with his spoon, his only superstition you've seen, and pours the water in a thin ribbon that turns brown and then black as if the morning were dissolving into itself. Joke 1 arrives with Amos, who sniffs the skillet and says, "If I eat any more of your bacon, King, my horse will refuse me for cruelty." King says without blinking, "You got to grow a heart somehow." Amos pats his chest. "Tryin'. Bacon's the only thing that sticks." The skillet answers for King with a persuasive hiss. Breakfast assembles the way a song fills its chorus. Beans with crisp edges, bacon folded once onto a tin plate, biscuits that lift the lid like polite guests standing. King cracks a pan egg into the fat, chases it with a dusting of pepper, and slides it over the beans so the yolk runs into the crevices like a small river finding its canyon. He spoons red-eye gravy from a pan deglazed with coffee and memory, then pushes the plate toward Elijah with a nod that means eat before it learns to walk. Mainstream fact again, and it tastes true. A chuckwagon's pantry ran on staples that traveled well: flour, salt, beans, coffee, sugar or molasses, dried fruit, salt pork, bacon, lard, baking soda, sometimes rice or cornmeal. Fresh meat arrived when a steer went lame or luck ran good with game. Fresh vegetables were rare as rain that listened. Cooks stretched variety with technique. Fritters, stews, dumplings, cobblers under a lid of biscuits, and with timing that made beans feel new when really they were just better behaved today. King lifts the Dutch oven with a hook, rattles the lid so ash falls away like gray snow, and tilts it to show you the bottoms of the biscuits, golden, not brown, as if they'd been sun-taught. "If you blacken 'em," he says, "you can call 'em travelers and throw 'em at coyotes. I prefer mine with butter." He cuts one, steam walking out like a rumor, and drops a thumb-sized pat of butter inside. It sighs. You understand prayer in a new way. Quirky tidbit again. Some cooks tucked a dried chili under the coffee pot's lid, swearing it kept flies away and made Cowboys polite. Others strung horseshoes from the wagon's side as wind chimes to warn rattlesnakes off a sleeping circle. King favors a simpler charm. The starter jar rides between 2 sacks so it feels the road but not the ruts. Like a baby in a cradle hung from the rafters. He keeps it fed with warm flour water at night. In the morning, it thanks him with bubbles like a pot trying not to laugh. Elijah eats with the focused gratitude of a man who's known thin meals. He tears biscuit, drags it through egg yolk, and hums approval. Isaiah arrives late, hat in hand, and King slides him a plate without comment, though you catch the half-smile he hides in the steam. The greenhorns hover, unsure about approaching the altar. King jerks his chin and they step in, wide-eyed. "Mind the edge of the board," he says. "It ain't a shelf for your elbows. It's a tender place where biscuits are born." Historians still argue whether black cooks on the trail were typecast into the role or gravitated there by choice. Some men signed on as top hands and drifted to the box when injuries or skill made it sensible. Others started at the fire, found a power the saddle rarely offered, and kept it. What's clear, reading between the scorched pages of old ledgers, is that many crews ate better, fought less, and moved smoother because a black cook ran the mornings like a gentle empire. Joke 2 bubbles up when Amos tries to snag a second biscuit and King raps his knuckles with the spoon's notch. "That spoon got teeth," Amos complains. King grins at the pot. "Biscuit's safer in there than in your hand." He slips the biscuit onto Amos's plate anyway, casual as weather. The light strengthens, the coffee pot empties, the skillet sighs low and then quiet. King wipes the board with a clean side of a flour sack, folds the lid onto the Dutch oven to keep the last biscuits warm for night riders, and begins to lash the box shut. Everything has a home: ladle, mill, matches in a tin, the little pot of baking soda wrapped like a secret. If the herd is a river, the wagon is the ferry, and King is the man who knows where the sandbars hide. Joke 3 lands soft as you lick gravy from your thumb and King says, "That'll cost you 1 dish washed." You offer to do 5. He nods at the creek. "Start with the ones that look like they've been chewed by a small bear." You recognize your own plate. Fair.as you carry the dishes toward the water, the camp lifts itself to standing. Saddles find backs, ropes coil to hands, the fire collapses into a disciplined glow that a boot can finish. Elijah whistles for Daisy. The mare appears like a word remembered at the right time. King ties down the board, slaps the wagon's side twice for luck, and climbs to his seat. When the trail moves, the wagon follows, wheels clicking over the ruts like a clock that prefers dust to walls. You fall in with the flank, warm and steadied from the inside out. Breakfast doesn't last, not in the mouth, but it lasts in the way the day agrees to go along with you a little farther than it would have otherwise. Somewhere behind you, the Dutch oven keeps 2 biscuits warm for a man who will need them when the moon is past its middle and the herd forgets the difference between wind and fear. Clouds rear up in the west like slow cattle deciding to be mountains. All morning the light has been bland and honest, but now the edges of things sharpen. Your horse pricks her ears and lifts her head as if a rumor just reached her hooves. The wind leans and changes flavor, less grass, more metal. You taste dust before you see it, a dry coin on the tongue. Elijah glances over, counts the beats between lightning and thunder with 2 fingers. "Storm's walking quick," he says. Daisy noses his boot, unimpressed by meteorology. Mainstream fact: the Southern Plains could throw 3 different punishments in the same season: flash floods from cloudbursts that turned arroyos into traps, dust storms that skinned the horizon raw, and late snows that laid a quiet, dangerous sheet over everything. Cattle drives learn to read the sky like scripture. Being wrong costs cattle, horses, and sometimes men. The trail boss angles the herd toward a low rise with scattered mesquite, slight shelter, better footing, room to mill without panic. You and Elijah drift to the flank where a few steers have started to fidget. The wind pulls your hat brim east and makes a thin flute out of your reins. Somewhere behind, King lashes a tarp over the chuck box, the canvas snapping like a flag that wants a different country. First comes dust, the forward scouts of the storm. It lifts off the ground in little nervous ghosts, then forgets to settle. The world's colors drain to 2, ochre and iron. You tie a kerchief over your nose and mouth and squint through the sepia. Amos rides past with a rag-wrapped bandit style. "Smile big," he hollers. "Saves wear on the cloth." Joke one lands, gritty and thin. You feel the grin anyway. The herd huddles by instinct, bodies shoulder to shoulder, eyes rolling a little white. You keep your mare at the edge, an arm's length off the nearest horn. Lightning sketches a crooked fence across the sky, and the thunder follows fast, a belly-deep thrum you feel through the saddle tree. A few drops spatter your sleeve, big, cold coins that spend themselves quickly. Then the rain decides you've been properly warned and sheets down as if the sky tipped a basin. Quirky tidbit. Some hands swore by rubbing a thumbprint of bacon grease on a saddle stitching before a storm. So the rain knows we're already spoken for. Others tied a single blue thread in a bridle for luck against lightning. You go with the third tradition. Tighten every strap and trust the horse that knows where her feet are. Water finds the gullies in an instant, dark veins running downhill. You watch for arroyos, those innocent lines that become loud in a blink. The trail boss points and the crew echoes the gesture like a dance. Keep the herd on the crown, off the draw, feet up where water slides by instead of through. Your mare tests each step, her front hooves slicing the new slick into steadier ground. A steer blunders toward a wash and Elijah is already there, voice low, posture wide, turning it with presence more than pressure. Daisy's ears flick good at your horse like a teacher approving a neat line. Historians still argue whether stampedes owed more to thunder or to nervous men, more to bad ground or bad luck. Trail diaries insist that singing, and calm horses under calm riders, cut trouble by half. You hum the lazy tune you heard Elijah use on Night Herd, something with more curve than corners, and the cattle near you choose to breathe instead of run. The rain hardens, then turns petty, stinging your cheeks like thrown sand. In the blur, you pick out Isaiah near the drag, hat-brim water falling, guiding a limping steer away from a sump that wants to be a lake. He moves slow on purpose, an argument with panic that panic loses. The chuck wagon jolts across the crown, its wheels carving quick trenches that fill the way rooms do when conversation finds a good story. King's kerchief is black with wet. Even his spoon would keep quiet in this. Then the change. Cold sneaks into the rain as if a higher cupboard opened. The drops grow fat, clumsy, and after a few uncertain minutes the storm borrows winter's voice. Snow arrives not as flakes but as wet confetti, slanting through dust and rain like the sky forgot which season it packed. Your coat takes the hit and soaks heavy, your horse hunches a fraction and keeps moving. Somewhere in the herd a calf bawls, a small, outraged trumpet at this rude weather polity. Mainstream fact again. Spring snows on the plains could kill cattle by chilling them to exhaustion. Drives learn to bunch the herd tight to conserve heat, keep them facing leeward, and move as little as necessary until the squall forgot itself. In summer, hail could bruise a man purple under his coat. The remedy for both was the same ancient one: endure. You and Elijah work the windward edge, letting your horses take the worst of it so the cattle can press inward. Breath fogs your kerchief. When you pull it down to gulp air it tastes like wet iron and sage. Lightning retires, satisfied with its sketching. Thunder clocks out. The rain, bored with being rain, goes back to being rain. The snow gives up. The dust will settle when it has finished its speech. In the lull, Amos rides by and taps your dripping hat. "You're steeped," he says. "Another 5 minutes and we can read fortunes in you." Joke 2 unties something tight in your chest. The storm's tail snaps once more and wanders off to frighten a different county. What's left is mud, slick as soap, honest as gravity. Hooves make the small, rude sounds of shoes in wet halls. You give your mare her head on the slope, and she chooses the diagonal steps that look foolish but feel wise. A steer goes down to its knees and flounders. Elijah is there, not yanking but shaping space with his horse until the animal finds a purchase and stands with the surprised pride of a dancer who stuck the landing. Daisy accepts no applause. Quirky tidbit again. Some hands carried a short length of rawhide thong for storm days. Not a whip, just a whisper of guidance when noise drowned voice. Others kept a lucky pebble in a pocket, flat and worry smooth, rubbed when clouds stacked. You pat the biscuit heel you tuck for your mare, and she bumps your boot like she knows barter when she smells it.by late afternoon. The light returns in pieces, ragged but warm. The herd loosens, noses down to the revealed grass as if none of that just happened. Your coat steams a little. King's talk drips like a line of commas. The chuck box opens, and the smell of coffee runs out to greet the crew like a dog who believes weather is merely a dramatic choice. You wrap cold fingers around the tin cup and feel civilization return to your knuckles. Historians still argue whether storms were the true authors of the West. Fences and railroads only footnotes in a book written by wind, water, and light. Read enough ledgers and you see numbers. Read enough trail notes, and you hear weather like a character with mood swings and excellent timing. Today it played villain, then comic relief, then a tired uncle who finally went home. At camp, you strip the saddle, set it upside down near the fire so the fleece can dry, and rub your mare's back with a rough towel until your own shoulders hum. She turns her head and clicks her teeth softly, a thank you in hoarse alphabet. You share the biscuit heel, she chews with ridiculous dignity. Amos wanders up and holds his hands to the heat. Reckon the storm was just passing through, he says. Like my good sense. Joke 3 earns him a chuck of King's cornbread and a look that says don't press your luck. The sky clears into a fragile blue, and the prairie glitters with a million tiny mirrors where raindrops cling to grass tips. You can hear water traveling in the shallow cuts, a polite retreat. Bedrolls steam, ropes dry over wagon spokes, and someone starts a small, wobbly tune that might be a hymn, or might be a lullaby with its hat on crooked. Your heart slows to match the new pace. When night comes, stars appear in clean air, fresher than yesterday's. You lie down close enough to hear your horse's slow chew and feel the softness that follows a day survived. The old rule holds. Weather writes the plot, but the crew writes the ending by staying put together. You pull your coat over your chest, listen for one last roll of distant thunder that never arrives, and let the quiet climb in beside you like a friend who doesn't need to talk. The herd looks calm enough under the early sun, but you've learned that's not a promise, it's a dare. Danger on the drive is never one thing. It's a knot of small somethings that pull tight without warning. A clumsy step, a shadow too quick, a snap of wind carrying the wrong smell, and you can go from idle to chaos before your coffee cools. Mainstream fact: stampedes were the greatest single danger on a cattle drive. 1,000 half-ton animals, startled into a run, could flatten riders, trample horses, and scatter the herd for miles. Causes were as trivial as a coyote's yip, a dropped frying pan, or thunder too close to bedtime. River crossings were close second, swift water turning docile cattle into confused swimmers and shifting sand into snares. Rustlers, while less common, brought human malice into an already unpredictable mix. This morning you spot the first flickers of trouble, a few steers bunching tighter than necessary, tails twitching like faulty metronomes. Elijah notices too. Keep an ear on 'em, he murmurs, settling deeper in the saddle. His horse lowers its head in sympathy. eyes on the herd like a teacher reading over a student's shoulder. The wind smells faintly of something burned, maybe lightning-struck mesquite from last night's storm, and a hawk circles low, its shadow slicing the herd in passing. That's enough for one steer to sidestep sharply, bumping its neighbor. The ripple starts, heads lift, ears pin, muscles coil. Quirky tidbit. Some trail hands carried night rattles, short lengths of chain or a bundle of mesquite pods, to shake rhythmically when a herd was restless at night. The sound was meant to mimic grazing, convincing cattle everything was fine. You've seen Elijah hum a hymn under his breath and rub his saddle horn in the same slow circles, as if reassurance can travel through leather. A sharp crack rings out, not thunder, just Amos dropping a cinch hook against his stirrup iron, but the sound has teeth. The ripple turns wave, 20, 50, 100 steers surge forward, pushing the rest. It's not full stampede yet, but it's leaning. You push your mare into the motion, not against it, aiming to arc wide and curve the lead animals into a circle before speed hardens into panic. Elijah is already opposite, the two of you forming a human-horse parenthesis around the point. Your mare stretches into the gallop like it's what she was made for, legs eating ground, breath matching yours in a fast duet. Historians still argue whether the mill technique, turning a herd into a slow, contained circle until they tire, was learned from vaquero tradition or born out of pure trail necessity. Either way, it works when you have enough riders, enough room, and enough nerve. The lead steer swerves as you come alongside, your knee brushing its horn. You lean, swing the reins low, and your mare sidesteps just enough to block. The animal grunts, annoyed but yielding, and follows the curve Elijah is laying down. Others bend with it, the outer edge slowing under the pressure of inside bodies. Dust rises, and through it you see Isaiah on the far flank, waving his hat like punctuation. Joke one cuts the edge when Amos, still riding drag, calls. If they wanted a morning jog, they could have sent a note. No one laughs out loud, lungs are busy, but you feel the grin in your teeth. Bit by bit, the wave loses height. Hooves still drum, but the rhythm changes from panic to insistence, then to the dull pound of tired legs. The mill tightens, the heads drop. One steer bellows, long and low, and it's as if the whole herd remembers grass exists. You ease your mare back to a walk, keeping a lazy pressure on the outside. Elijah tips his hat at you across the ring. Mainstream fact again. River crossings carried their own breed of danger. Steers unused to swimming could balk at the bank, leap in wrong, or crowd too close, forcing others under. Riders sometimes had to rope and lead the first few animals across, counting on herd instinct to pull the rest. Strong swimmers could still drown if tangled in driftwood or pulled into deep eddies. By midday, you get a taste of that lesson. The trail boss points the herd toward a river, wide, brown, lazy-looking but with shoulders under the surface. The far bank glitters with fresh grass like a dare. You and Elijah ride ahead to test the crossing. Your mare sniffs the water, toes in, and steps down carefully, the current wrapping her legs in invisible ribbons. She lowers her head for balance. You give her the slack she needs. Quirky tidbit again. Some cowboys tucked plugs of tobacco into their horses' cheeks before a swim, swearing it kept the animals calm. Others swore at the very idea. Elijah offers Daisy nothing but a steady voice and a loose rein, and she moves like she's following an old memory. Halfway across, a steer tries to cut upstream, panic widening its eyes. Elijah edges Daisy into its path, not pushing but being there, a wall with breath. The steer hesitates, then drifts back toward the herd's center, legs working under the opaque surface. Your mare swims with a slow, strong kick, and you feel the lift and fall of each stride. Historians still argue whether cattle actually followed the leader in crossings or simply aimed for the largest visible group. Either way, once the first dozen reach the far side, the rest flow after, clambering up the bank with a chorus of low complaints. On land again, water runs off hides in dark rivulets. Horses shake, splattering riders with cold freckles. Amos wipes his face and says, "We should charge em for the bath." Joke too gets a tired chuckle from Isaiah, who's wringing his hat like a sponge. The herd spreads onto the new grass, heads down, chewing as if nothing dramatic happened. You know better, there's a notch of fatigue in their posture, and you can feel it in your own knees. You rub your mare's neck, murmuring nonsense thanks. She flicks an ear, which might mean you're welcome or where's my biscuit. By the time camp sets, the river sounds are just background music, the kind you notice only when it stops. King's fire smells of coffee and onion. The wagon's shadow stretches toward the herd like a tether. No one talks much. Danger draws the words out of you while it's happening, then leaves you too aware of how close the line can come. Joke 3 slides in at the end when Amos eyes the stew and says, "If the river was warmer, I'd done the laundry." King ladles his bowl without looking up. "You can still wash your own spoon." The spoon makes it to Amos's mouth without protest. You lie down later with the sound of slow chewing in the dark, the river whispering beyond. Danger will come again. That's not a threat, just the nature of the road. You pull your coat up and let the knowledge fold over you like another blanket, thin, but enough for now. Morning opens with a light mist clinging low to the grass, softening edges and turning the herd into vague shapes, like a memory you can almost place. The air is damp enough that your shirt feels cool against your skin, and every breath tastes faintly of earth and wet leather. Horses snort steam, impatient for movement, their ears flicking to invisible signals you'll never quite hear. Today's stretch of trail winds toward a trading post, one of those stitched-together places where news, supplies, and gossip are sold at the same counter. The herd moves at an easy walk, the ground forgiving after last night's rain. Elijah rides beside you, tapping a slow rhythm on his saddle horn. "Town will be the loudest thing we've heard in weeks," he says, and you can hear the mix of anticipation and caution in his voice. Mainstream fact: in the years after the Civil War, many cattle trails passed through or ended at frontier towns where ranchers sold their herds and crews stocked up. Trading posts and railheads became melting pots. Cowboys of every background, shopkeepers, railroad men, gamblers, and travelers from far-off territories. For black cowboys, such stops could mean moments of rare camaraderie, but also unpredictable prejudice, depending on who was behind the counter or wearing the badge. As you approach, the land flattens into a clearing dotted with rough-hewn buildings, a general store with a warped sign, a saloon with its doors flung open, and a stable with one wall missing to the breeze. The chuck wagon rolls to a halt in a patch of shade, King already eyeing the store's porch like a man with a list in his head. Quirky tidbit: some trading posts kept a small cowboy corner, stocked with goods aimed at trail crews, cheap harmonicas, illustrated dime novels, even pre-cut tobacco twists with twine already tied. King ignores all of that and makes for the shelves of flour, coffee, and dried peaches, muttering prices like he's tallying against memory. Elijah, Isaiah, and you are given the task of finding extra rope and replacing a busted cinch strap. Inside the store, the smell is part molasses, part dust, part something metallic from the barrel of nails in the corner. The shopkeeper, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a braid long enough to loop twice at her hip, greets Elijah by name. Must be from a previous run. "Heard you had weather," she says. Brought us a sky full of it yesterday. Elijah smiles. We like to share. Historians still argue whether frontier towns truly welcomed the diversity that cattle drives brought, or simply tolerated it when there was money to be made. Ledgers showed the trade. Personal letters revealed the tensions. In some places, black cowboys could drink, dance, and swap stories freely. In others, the welcome ended when the coin changed hands. Outside, Amos is already at the saloon's porch, playing a lazy tune on a borrowed guitar. Two ranch hands from another outfit sit nearby, boots propped on the railing. One tips his hat at you, the other keeps his eyes on the dust, as if it has more to say. Joke one comes from Isaiah as he tests the new cinch straps leather. Better than my Sunday belt, he says, pulling it snug. And less likely to embarrass me at church. Elijah raises an eyebrow. That's a low bar, Isaiah. You carry the rope back to the wagon, where King is bartering for a sack of beans. He's leaning on the counter just enough to say he's in no hurry, but his eyes don't miss a single coin in the exchange. The shopkeeper tosses in a small jar of molasses as a bonus, maybe for the trail stories King told, maybe because he bought more than anyone else in a month. Quirky tidbit again. Some cooks carried a spice roll, a cloth strip with tiny sewn pockets for pinches of salt, pepper, chili, or cinnamon. Rolled up, it looked like nothing worth stealing. Unrolled, it was the difference between plain beans and something worth remembering. You've seen King unfurl his like a card sharp laying down a winning hand. The herd is kept just outside town, a couple of hands watching for wanderers. You walk out with Elijah to check the line, the quiet a relief after the chatter. A few steers lift their heads, chewing with the solemn air of creatures unimpressed by human errands. The rope is coiled, the cinch fitted, the rest of the supplies stowed. Historians still argue whether trail towns were more lifeline or trap, essential for resupply, but also places where a single bad night could cost the cowboy his wages, his horse, or worse. The balance often depended on who you rode with and how well you could read a room. Amos wanders back with the guitar slung over his shoulder, and a grin that suggests a card game went his way. Found us some music for tonight, he says. King doesn't look up from sorting his beans. Hope it's better than your singing, he replies. Joke 2 earns a groan from Amos and a laugh from Elijah. The trail boss calls for the crew to mount up. The town recedes quickly, buildings sinking back into the heat haze. In its place, the open prairie stretches out again, wider, quieter, with only the sound of hooves and the creak of leather. Joke 3 drifts in from Isaiah. Well, that was the most expensive rope I've ever bought. Not in money, in listening to Amos play that guitar. Amos plucks a defiant chord in response, and the herd shifts forward like it's the downbeat to their next mile.by evening. Camp is pitched on a rise with a view of the horizon in all directions. The town feels distant already, its noise and walls replaced by the easy sprawl of grass and sky. You sit by the fire, the jar of molasses tucked safely into King's stores, and wonder how many more such towns lie between here and the trail's end, and how many will remember you when you're gone. By dawn, the camp has already begun to stretch and stir, bedrolls rolled tight, coffee's first bitter steam curling above the fire. The herd grazes loosely in the pale light, soft-voiced in the morning air. Today is different. The trail boss has marked it for pushing hard, covering more miles than usual to reach a wide river bottom where the grass is said to be thick and sweet. You ride flank with Elijah again, the air still cool enough that you keep your coat buttoned. The horse's breath puffs in short clouds, their hooves drumming a steady rhythm over firm ground. Amos rides ahead on point, a red kerchief tied high against the dust. Mainstream fact: cattle drives often used a push day to make up for time lost to weather, strays, or slow crossings. Crews would rise earlier, rest less, and keep the herd moving at a steady walk from sunup until near dark. Horses were rotated more often, and meals became quick, efficient affairs. The push has a rhythm, slow enough not to exhaust the herd, but steady enough that the grass they pass gets no second look. You keep a watchful eye for stragglers, knowing the lagging steer can become a real problem if it falls too far behind. Quirky tidbit: some hands swore that whistling during a push kept the herd in a better mood. Others thought it bad luck, claiming it called up wind or storms. Elijah settles on humming instead, something low and steady that seems to melt into the hoofbeats. By midday, the sun is high and the shade minimal. The chuck wagon rattles ahead toward the noon stop, King's broad-brimmed hat making him look like an anchored sail against the glare. When you finally pull up for a quick meal, it's beans and bread, fast to serve, fast to eat. King eyes the horizon like a man timing his cooking to the length of a shadow. Historians still argue whether such push days were truly worth the strain. Some diaries praise the practice for reaching better grazing faster. Others grumble that sore-footed cattle lost weight in the bargain. The truth, as usual, probably sits somewhere between. After the short break, the herd moves again. You feel the heat gathering under your coat and loosen it, grateful for the light breeze rising from the south. Somewhere ahead, Isaiah calls out to Amos about a steer drifting toward a shallow draw. Amos angles in without breaking stride, the two riders working like cogs in a wheel to nudge the animal back into line. Joke one arrives when Amos rides past you afterward. "That steer was looking for an easier job," he says. "Told him the only open position is chuck wagon dish duty." You grin, imagining the steer holding a plate with its nose. Late afternoon brings a subtle shift. The air thickens, clouds gather low and slow. You and Elijah exchange a look. "Could be rain," he says. "Or just the sky thinking about it." The herd senses it too, bunching a little tighter. You keep your position steady, letting your mare's calm spread to the animals closest to her. Quirky tidbit again. Some cowboys claimed that cattle could smell rain a half-day before it arrived, reacting before the first drop fell. They'd watch for a sudden stillness in the herd, ears flicking toward distant thunder no one else could hear. By the time the river bottom comes into view, the sun is setting, smearing the clouds in bands of copper and violet. The grass here is indeed lush, bending under the weight of its own seed. The herd moves into it with contentment, heads down, chewing in rhythm. Mainstream fact again, river bottoms were prime grazing land on the trail, but they came with risks. Mosquito swarms, sudden flooding, and predators that used the cover of taller grass. Crews kept night watches sharp in such spots, splitting shifts to guard both herd and horses. Camp goes up quickly, everyone eager for a fire and a chance to rest after the long haul. King serves a thick stew tonight, with the molasses from the trading post stirred in just enough to give it a deep, sweet undertone. Elijah sits cross-legged near the wagon, Daisy's reins looped over his knee. Joke too floats over the fire when Isaiah pokes at his bowl and says, "King, this stew's so rich I feel like I should tip it." King replies without looking up, "You can tip the pot into the wash barrel when you're done." The night settles deep and quiet, the herd barely moving in the moonlight. The tall grass sways like a slow tide around camp. Amos strums the guitar, his fingers clumsy but his tune steady enough to carry you toward drowsiness. Joke 3 slips out when Amos misses a chord and mutters, "Guess my fingers are still walking push miles." Elijah chuckles. "They'll catch up tomorrow." The sound of their laughter blends with the rustle of grass, the occasional stamp of a horse, and the low, steady breath of the herd. You roll into your bedroll, feeling the long day in every joint, but also the quiet satisfaction of having made the distance. Above you, the stars are clear and sharp, unbothered by the small troubles of the trail. You close your eyes knowing tomorrow will bring its own demands. But tonight, the herd rests, the grass is thick, and the river runs slow. The first thing you notice when you wake is the smell: damp earth and river mud, faint but persistent. A low mist has crept in overnight, curling around the legs of the grazing herd and clinging to your boots as you walk. It's quiet enough that you can hear the occasional plunk of a fish in the river and the soft tearing of grass between a steer's teeth. This morning's task is to ride with Elijah and Isaiah on a short loop along the river to check for strays, hazards, or signs of predators. The tall grass hides more than it reveals, and you keep your eyes peeled for the flick of an ear or the twitch of a tail. Mainstream fact: in river-bottom country, herds were more vulnerable to predators like wolves or even the occasional cougar, both of which were known to shadow cattle drives for days before making a move. While full-grown cattle were difficult to bring down, calves or sick animals could be easy targets. Night watches in these areas were as much about listening for movement in the grass as they were about guarding against stampedes. The grass here is thigh-high in places, its seed heads heavy with dew. Your mare's legs vanish into it with each step, and you find yourself leaning forward slightly, scanning for the faint track of trampled stems that might betray a steer gone wandering. Elijah rides a few paces ahead, Daisy's ears flicking like twin weather vanes. Quirky tidbit: some cowboys swore that talking aloud, nonsense words, songs, or even reciting Bible verses could ward off predators, who supposedly avoided human voices. Elijah hums under his breath, the tune meandering and low, just enough to make the grass seem less like a hiding place and more like a quiet audience. You spot the first sign of trouble near a bend in the river, a patch where the grass is flattened and muddied, leading down to a steep, wet bank. Hoofprints disappear into the muck, and you see a slick slide where an animal lost its footing. "Could have been last night," Isaiah says, dismounting to take a closer look. "Tracks say it came back up, though." Historians still argue whether crews in the Old West exaggerated the dangers of predators to justify larger watch shifts, or whether accounts of wolves taking cattle were underplayed to keep ranch owners from panicking. Diaries mention both extremes: nights of uneasy silence, and others punctuated by the chorus of hungry voices just beyond the firelight. You continue upriver, the mist thinning as the sun climbs. A heron lifts from the water with a slow, deliberate beat of its wings, its reflection shivering in the current. A few deer bound away through the shallows, their hooves sending up arcs of silver spray. Joke one arrives when Elijah nods toward the deer and says, "Reckon they'd be easier to herd than cattle?" Isaiah grins. "Only if you like running in circles." By late morning you find the missing steer, a rangy, dun-colored animal with a half-healed scar along its flank, calmly grazing near a stand of cottonwoods. Elijah circles wide, Isaiah coming in from the other side, and the steer drifts back toward the main herd without complaint. Quirky tidbit again: some hands carried a pouch of salt to lure stubborn cattle, sprinkling a little on the grass ahead of the animal. Whether it was the taste or just the curiosity, it sometimes worked better than shouting or roping. Elijah prefers patience, claiming that rushing only teaches a steer new ways to be difficult. The ride back is slower, the sun now warm on your shoulders. The herd comes into view through the grass, a moving patchwork of hides and horns, tails swishing in lazy unison. You feel that small sense of relief that comes with knowing every head is accounted for. Back at camp, King has cornbread baking in a cast-iron Dutch oven buried in coals. The smell is enough to make Amos wander over from his post with exaggerated nonchalance. "Just making sure the fire's behaving," he says. King doesn't even glance up. "It is. You can go now." Joke 2 earns a snort from Isaiah. After lunch, the crew takes advantage of the good grazing to rest the horses, loosening cinches, wiping sweat from withers, and letting the animals roll in the dust. You stretch out in the shade of the chuck wagon, hat tipped over your eyes, the steady sound of chewing and river water like a lullaby. Historians still argue whether such layover days were a luxury or a necessity. Some accounts suggest they built up the herd's weight before the final push. Others say they were simply the only way to keep both cattle and crew from wearing out before the trail's end. The evening brings a slight breeze, stirring the grass in soft waves. Amos tunes his guitar, plucking notes until a melody emerges. Elijah joins in with quiet harmonies, the two voices threading through the firelight. Joke 3 comes when Amos pauses mid-song to sweat a mosquito. "Guess it liked my singing," he says. Elijah deadpans. "Guess it's tone deaf." The laughter rolls easy, like the river beside you, and the night settles around the camp with the comfort of familiar ground. You drift to sleep with the smell of wood smoke in your hair, the soft murmur of the herd nearby, and the distant splash of something large moving in the dark, just the river reminding you it's always there, patient and unhurried. The river bottom grass fades behind you as the trail tilts upward into rolling country, the kind where the wind has free rein and the horizon seems a little farther away with every mile. The morning starts crisp, the air smelling faintly of sun-warmed stone. Hooves clop on patches of exposed rock, the sound carrying farther than you expect in the open air. The herd moves well, heads down, tails swaying lazily, and you can feel a collective settling among the crew after the good graze. The trail boss rides point today, his hat brim shadowing his eyes as he scans for the best line forward. Elijah is back at your side, posture loose but gaze sharp, while Isaiah works the far flank. Mainstream fact, drives in this part of the country often followed old game trails, then adapted them into routes for cattle. These paths were worn into the land by generations of bison or deer, always seeking water and easier passes. Cowboys used them for the same reasons: less brush, fewer steep climbs, and a clearer view of approaching weather. The wind up here has a clean bite to it, teasing at your hat and setting the grass into constant motion. Somewhere behind, the chuck wagon rattles over a stretch of stone, the pots inside clinking like muted chimes. King will not be happy about that. Quirky tidbit: some cooks pack their most fragile kitchen tools, coffee grinders, spice jars, even bread pans, inside flour sacks to muffle the shaking. King swears by wrapping his in spare shirts, which he says saves both the gear and the laundry from trail dust. You ride close to the herd's outer edge, keeping an eye on a young steer whose restless head bobbing suggests it's thinking about wandering. Elijah notices too and gives a low whistle, just enough to turn the animal's thoughts back inward. "First sign of trouble is always in the ears," he murmurs. Historians still argue whether the partnership between riders and horses was more practical necessity or genuine bond. Letters from some cowhands describe their mounts as tools, no different from a lariat. Others speak of them like trusted friends, with personalities, quirks, and loyalties all their own. Watching Daisy match Elijah's every shift in weight, you lean toward the latter. By midday, you crest a low ridge and see the next valley laid out below, a quilt of grassland and scrub, with a silver thread of creek cutting through it. The trail boss signals a halt to let the herd drink and graze before the descent. Horses are unsaddled briefly to cool, their sweat darkening the hair along their flanks. Joke 1 comes when Amos points at a large boulder near the water and says, "There's our new chuck wagon. Less squeak, more shade." King shoots him a look that could peel paint, and Amos wisely moves on. The descent into the valley is slow, careful work. Loose rocks skitter under hooves, and you feel your mare's muscles working under you as she adjusts her weight. The herd follows the rider's lead, moving single file down the gentler slopes. At the creek, they drink deep, the sound a chorus of steady gulps. Quirky tidbit again. Some trail hands swore by letting their horses take the first drink before the cattle, believing the herd followed the animal's example. Others thought it a waste of time, especially on days when every minute counted toward making camp before dark. The afternoon light softens as you cross the valley, long shadows stretching across the grass. Elijah points toward a stand of cottonwoods where the trail boss is steering the herd. "Good place for camp," he says. "Windbreak, water, and enough open ground to see what's coming." Mainstream fact again. Picking a campsite on the drive was part science, part instinct. Proximity to water, protection from wind, and flat ground for the herd were all vital. Crews avoided low spots that could flood in a sudden storm, as well as areas with too much brush where predators could hide. By the time the chuck wagon rolls in, the fire is already crackling. The smell of coffee drifts on the air, mingling with the sharper scent of fresh-cut wood. King has a pot of beans simmering and something sweet tucked into the coals. Probably cornbread, if you're lucky. Joke 2 arrives when Isaiah leans close to the fire and says, "Smells like King's cooking up an apology for yesterday's stew." King doesn't look up. "Smells like you're on dish duty tomorrow." The night comes quick in the valley, the cottonwoods rustling with the last of the day's wind. The herd beds down easily, the sound of their breathing steady and low. Amos strums a slow tune on the guitar, his silhouette flickering in the firelight. Joke 3 slides in when Amos, mid-song, asks, "Think the herd would mind if I taught them a chorus?" Elijah answers without missing a beat, "Only if you sing it out loud." The laughter blends with the creek's gentle murmur, a reminder that tomorrow will be another day of the same, different enough to stay interesting, steady enough to feel like the trail might stretch forever. Morning breaks with the sound of hoofbeats, not the herd, but a lone rider approaching camp. You're sitting by the fire nursing a tin mug of coffee when the figure comes into view, a young man in a dust-stained hat, leading a paint horse with a rope bridle. His shirt is a faded blue, sleeves rolled high, and his smile carries the easy confidence of someone who knows how to draw attention. The trail boss greets him by name, Caleb, and explains he's been riding the rodeo circuit, working exhibitions in nearby towns. He's here for a few days to rest his horse and visit old friends. Mainstream fact, by the late 19th century, as open-range cattle drives declined, many cowboys, black and white alike, shifted their skills into rodeos, which began as informal competitions between ranch hands before becoming public spectacles. Riders competed in roping, bronc riding, and steer wrestling, showing off the same abilities they once used for daily ranch work. Caleb wastes no time setting up a rope loop, spinning it casually while chatting with Elijah. "Folks'll pay a nickel to see a man rope a steer," he says. "Doesn't seem like much, but it adds up if you've got the skill." Quirky tidbit: early rodeo performers sometimes dressed in flashy, exaggerated cowboy outfits, bright scarves, fringed shirts, and oversized hats, meant to stand out in a crowded arena. Caleb's gear is more practical, but you catch a glimpse of a scarlet neckerchief stuffed in his saddlebag. Later, he gives a demonstration in camp. Amos volunteers as the Steer! Jogging away with a chuckle. Caleb's rope hums through the air and settles neatly around Amos's waist before tightening with a jerk. Guess I'd pay a nickel for that, Amos says, catching his breath. Historians still argue whether rodeos preserved authentic cowboy traditions or turned them into stylized performances for paying crowds. What's certain is that many black cowboys found in rodeos a way to continue working with livestock while gaining recognition otherwise denied to them in ranching history. By midday, Caleb is swapping stories about rodeo towns, places where the dust was always ankle-deep, the saloons loud, and the beds softer than any bedroll under the stars. Elijah listens with a faint smile, occasionally glancing at Daisy as if weighing the idea himself. Joke one comes when Amos mutters, "If they'll pay me to nap in front of a crowd, I'm in." King shoots back, "They'd pay double if you didn't sing while you did it." The afternoon heat settles over the camp like a heavy blanket. Caleb pulls out his scarlet neckerchief, wraps it loosely around his throat, and invites anyone willing to try their hand at trick roping. You give it a shot, managing a decent loop before it collapses in a tangle. Caleb grins. "You've got the wrist for it, just needs miles." Quirky tidbit again. Some ropers train by tossing loops over stationary objects for hours. A fence post, a chair back, even a dozing goat. The trick, Caleb insists, is less about strength than rhythm. As evening comes, the herd is calm, the campfire steady. Caleb talks about a rodeo in Fort Worth where a black rider named Bill Pickett wowed the crowd with a move called bulldogging, leaping from a horse to wrestle a steer to the ground. The story draws wide eyes and a round of low whistles. Mainstream fact again, Bill Pickett, born in 1870, became one of the most famous black rodeo performers, credited with inventing the steer wrestling technique still used today. Though his name is now in rodeo halls of fame, his fame was once limited by the era's racial barriers, sometimes forcing him to claim Comanche heritage to secure bookings. Joke 2 arrives when Isaiah asks Caleb if he can teach him bulldogging. Caleb looks him over and says, "Sure, but first you'll need a steer, a horse, and a good life insurance policy." The night winds down with Amos playing the guitar, Caleb adding quiet harmonies. The fire pops, sending a stray spark toward the dark beyond the wagons. The air smells of mesquite smoke and faint molasses from the last of King's cornbread. Joke 3 slides in as King starts covering the coffee pot. "Careful, Caleb," he says. "Stay too long and we'll have you doing dishes instead of rope tricks." Caleb chuckles. "Guess I'll make my exit before dawn, then." You lie in your bedroll, listening to the murmur of low voices and the shuffle of the herd. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, the creek whispers its steady tune. Rodeo or range, you think, the work is the same, hands, horses, and a horizon that always asks for more. Dawn finds Caleb already saddled, that scarlet neckerchief bright in the pale light as he shakes hands with the crew. He's heading west, chasing another rodeo before the summer's end. Elijah gives him a nod. Amos shouts after him to rope something worth bragging about. And then he's just a speck moving into the shimmer of the horizon. The trail boss wastes no time getting the herd moving. Today's path skirts a stretch of broken country, low ridges of sandstone, scattered mesquite, and the occasional dry wash that looks shallow until you're standing in it. The air warms quickly, carrying the dusty scent of sun-baked rock. Mainstream fact, dry washes, or arroyos, were common obstacles on cattle drives through the Southwest and plains. Though dry most of the time, they could become dangerous torrents after sudden storms miles away, catching herds and riders off guard. Crews learned to cross them early in the day and to watch the skies even when no clouds loomed overhead. You ride flank with Isaiah, whose mare keeps flicking her tail at the growing swarm of flies. He mutters about needing a fly strategy, which prompts Elijah, riding ahead, to suggest he wear more molasses since the bugs seem to prefer him. Quirky tidbit. Some cowboys smeared their horses' ears with bacon grease or bear fat to keep flies from biting. Others swore by hanging small bundles of pungent herbs, like wormwood or pennyroyal, from the saddle. You've seen both work, somewhat. The herd crosses the first arroyo without trouble, hooves thudding on the soft sand at the bottom. You keep an eye on the steep banks, scanning for fresh erosion that might crumble under weight. The second crossing proves trickier, narrower, with loose stone at the edge. Elijah goes first, Daisy picking her way carefully, and the rest follow. Historians still argue whether the dangers of flash floods were overblown in trail accounts, or if crews simply got lucky more often than they admitted. Some letters describe nights spent camped on high ground, listening to the roar of unseen water tearing through a wash below. By midday, the sandstone ridges open into a small plateau with short grass and a scattering of wildflowers. The breeze here is stronger, pushing at your hat brim. King chooses a sheltered spot against a low rise to set the fire, grumbling about wind in the beans, as he weighs the coffee pot lid down with a flat rock. Joke one comes when Amos tries to help by shielding the fire with his body. King waves him off. You're more wind than the weather. After a quick meal, the drive resumes. The herd moves steadily, the land rolling away beneath their hooves. In the distance, you spot a hawk riding a thermal, its shadow flickering over the ground like a passing thought. Quirky tidbit again. Some cowhands claimed hawks could predict weather better than any man. If the bird soared high, the day would be fair. If they stayed low, rain or wind was on the way. Looking up at the hawk above, you figure you'll take your chances. The afternoon brings the third arroyo, a deeper cut shaded by mesquite. The air down there is cooler, smelling faintly of damp clay. The herd files through, their lowing echoing off the banks. You pause to check the far side for footing, then swing back into the saddle. Mainstream fact again, navigating such cuts took time, and every delay risked shortening the distance covered that day. Trail bosses balance caution with pace, knowing a single injury to man or beast could cost far more than a few lost miles. By the time you reach camp, the sun is a molten edge on the horizon. The fire burns low, throwing long shadows across the cottonwoods. Amos plucks a slow, lazy tune, and Elijah hums along from his bedroll. Joke too drifts in when Isaiah eyes the last biscuit on the plate. If no one claims it in 10 seconds, it's mine. King doesn't look up from the pot he's scrubbing. Better make that 2 seconds. The night is quiet save for the occasional stamp of a hoof and the murmur of wind through the trees. Stars spill across the sky like scattered salt, and the air cools enough that you pull your coat tight. Joke 3 comes from Amos as you settle in. Bet Caleb's sleeping in a feather bed tonight. Elijah replies without opening his eyes. Bet he'd trade it for a night without people watching. You drift off thinking about that. How the trail offers no curtains, no crowds, just the endless space between campfires and dawn. The morning comes slow and golden, the first rays spilling over the rim of the plateau. Dew clings to the grass, soaking the hems of your trousers as you walk to check the remuda. Horses lift their heads at your approach, ears flicking in that half-greeting, half-assessment way they have. Elijah is already there, leaning on the fence rope with a piece of straw between his teeth. Today's plan is straightforward. Keep the herd moving north along a shallow basin where water and forage are steady, and avoid the rocky uplands to the west. The air smells of damp soil and crushed sage as the crew saddles up. Mainstream fact: cattle drives often follow these natural basins, where grass could be found in long stretches and the terrain made for easier travel. They were like nature's own corridors, shaped over centuries by migrating bison and deer. Such routes cut days off the journey compared to rougher, more broken ground. You take the left flank today, riding near a cluster of younger steers that tend to drift if left unchecked. The ground is soft from last night's dew, and the herd's hooves leave a dark trail behind you. Quirky tidbit: some trail hands believe that singing to the herd in the morning kept them calmer through the day. Songs could be old work tunes, hymns, or just a string of nonsense syllables, anything rhythmic enough to blend with the hoofbeats. Amos starts in on a slow verse about beans in the pan and dust on my boots, which earns a few laughs but also keeps the animals steady. By late morning, the basin narrows, and the trail boss signals a brief rest at a low, willow-lined stream. The herd fans out to drink, tails swishing lazily. King gets the coffee pot going, the smell cutting through the cool air. Historians still argue whether the pace of a drive was more about the needs of the cattle or the demands of the market. Some say crews pushed harder when prices were high. Others point out that sick or underfed cattle fetched less, making steady, careful progress more profitable. After coffee, you ride on. The basin opens into a wide meadow dotted with yellow wildflowers. Bees drift lazily from bloom to bloom, and the hum is almost enough to lull you into forgetting the work at hand. Elijah, riding ahead, waves you toward a gap in the line where a steer has started to drift. You angle in, bringing it back without fuss. Joke one comes from Isaiah, who calls across the line. "You're making that look too easy. Next time, take the long way around." The sun climbs higher, turning the air warm enough that you loosen your neckerchief. The meadow rolls on for miles, the horizon wavering in the heat. A hawk circles overhead, its shadow flashing briefly across the herd. Quirky tidbit again: some cowboys swore that if you saw a hawk mid-drive, it meant good weather for the next 3 days. Others joked it meant the hawk was looking for the slowest calf. By mid-afternoon, the meadow gives way to a stand of cottonwoods, where the trail boss decides to camp early. The grass is thick, the water clear, and the breeze just enough to keep the flies down. Horses are unsaddled and turned loose to roll in the dust, legs kicking at the air. Mainstream fact again: picking an early camp was sometimes a morale choice as much as a practical one. A little extra rest for both herd and crew could prevent bigger problems later: injuries, fatigue, or the kind of sour mood that made men short-tempered and careless. King serves up biscuits and salt pork, the smell drifting across camp. Amos, with his guitar, settles near the fire and starts a tune that's more hum than song. The herd's lowing blends into the background, steady as the creek. Joke 2 comes when Isaiah eyes the pot and says, "Any chance there's dessert?" King replies, "Only if you count going to bed early as sweet." The evening settles in slow. The sky turns lavender, the cottonwoods casting long shadows across the grass. Fireflies blink in the half-light, their slow pulse matching the easy rhythm of camp. Joke 3 drifts in as Amos tunes his guitar. "Think the herd would like a lullaby?" Elijah smirks. "Only if it's quieter than your last one." The laughter is soft, almost lost to the breeze. You stretch out in your bedroll, the smell of sage in the air and the sound of the stream nearby. It's the kind of night that makes you forget how many miles are still ahead. You can feel it before you can explain it, the trail getting shorter without losing a single mile. The world that once ran like open handwriting across the plains begins to print itself in neat, sharp lines. One morning you crest a low rise and there it is, a fence dragging its thorned shadow over the grass. It cuts the land like a decision. The herd slows without being told. Your mare flicks an ear, sidesteps, and snorts the way she does at things that pretend to be snakes. Elijah rides up, Daisy's reins loose in his hand, and points with his chin. "Devil's rope," he says, the old nickname giving the wire a small, crooked smile it doesn't deserve. Beyond the posts, a windmill turns lazily, a square of fresh plowed earth dark as coffee, and a cabin with a stovepipe too new to be modest. Mainstream fact: in the 1870s and 1880s, barbed wire spread across the West, accelerating the end of the open range. Combined with homesteading laws and the advance of railroads, the wire parceled what had been shared grazing into private property. Trails that once flowed like rivers were hemmed, narrowed, or blocked outright, and the big cattle outfits had to pay, detour, or fight. You follow the fence to a gate, counting staples and twists the way a man counts the beats in a psalm. Isaiah finds the latch and eases the herd through while Amos rides drag, muttering that he'll start charging the wire a toll. King, from his wagon track, tips his hat to the windmill. "Well," he says, "that's one less creek a man has to argue with." He sounds like someone congratulating an enemy for good manners. Quirky tidbit: new hands sometimes grease their gloves with lard before a day of fencing, claiming it helped the barbs slide without biting. The veterans say lard just makes wire a better liar. Isaiah prefers a pair of little iron nippers he keeps in his vest. He swears they open more gates than any key does. You ride on and see the changes stack up like ledgers. Where there were buffalo traces, there are survey stakes. Where there were muddy crossings and patient ferries, there are trestles marching over the river, railroad bridges with iron ribs that shine like wet fish. A freight train blows along, impatient note in the distance, and your mare raises her head, surprised to hear thunder that runs on time. Historians still argue whether the railroads rescued or ruined the trail cowboy. Freight cars meant cattle could be loaded closer to the range and shipped east without months of wear. But rails also made ranches smaller and markets quicker, thinning the need for men who could keep a herd moving through 3 states on coffee, beans, and stubbornness. At a small siding, you watch a crew load steers into stock cars. The animals balk at the ramp, then move, urged by men with paddles and soft curses. Elijah leans on his horn and says softly, "Short miles, long days." He explains that some hands now ride, line, along fence and windmill instead of trail, mending wire, checking water, counting calves inside borders instead of under the weather. It's work that pays steady and keeps you close to a bunk, but it doesn't smell like the horizon. Joke 1 arrives when Amos eyes the stock car and sighs. "If they're inventing a train for dish duty, I'm retiring." King, tugging the lid on his coffee pot, answers, "They already did. Railroad dining car. They just won't let you in." The herd moves again, but differently, less river, more canal. You find yourself watching the ground for cut wire ends, watching the sky for smoke instead of storm. The chuck wagon rattles over ruts carved by freight wagons delivering fence posts and sacks of seed. In a new-built town, a hardware store window shines with displays, polished pliers, coils of wire, boxes of staples with labels illustrated like dime novels. A handbill tacked to the door advertises, "Windmills erected, water guaranteed." Water on demand. The sky keeps its cooler sympathy and sells it wholesale. Mainstream fact again. The great winter of 1886 to 87, with blizzards and deep cold across the northern plains, killed vast numbers of cattle and bankrupted outfits already squeezed by wire and falling prices. Many historians mark that season as the true end of the old open-range system. Afterward, herds were kept smaller and closer, winter feed was stacked, and drives became short, local moves to railheads. You hear the winter in camp stories now, even under a generous sun. Isaiah talks about a different outfit, farther north, where men rode out after storms and found their cattle jammed against fences, drifted there by wine they couldn't fight. No wire, he says, and they'd have kept walking till they found shelter or they didn't. Wire made the choice for them. He doesn't say if that was mercy or murder. You don't ask? Quirky tidbit again, in the fence-cutting wars of early 1880s Texas, some riders carried pocket files to saw through illegal fences that blocked public water. Others left notes tied to posts, polite warnings in neat handwriting, before the wire vanished overnight. Counties posted rewards. Juries shrugged. Towns debated whether a closed gate could lock out the sky.by afternoon. The trail boss consults a ledger more often than the wind. He checks a map penciled with dotted lines. Fence here, quarantine line there. Because Texas fever ticks hitch rides north on cattle and states draw invisible walls to stop them. The old drive went as the crow flew. The new one steps politely around what crows ignore. Historians still argue whether the decline of the trail was inevitable progress or a theft of a particular kind of freedom. Some say barbed wire democratized the range. Little men could protect little places. Others say it privatized what had been held, if not by law then by long use, in common. The railroads look innocent in their photographs. The wire looks plain in its coils. The arguments were better than boots. You notice the crews shifting with the times. A boy who came on green learns to tally calves with a pencil behind his ear. Elijah talks, not unhappily, about a winter job at a line camp. 2 men, a stove, a string of windows to check, a stack of novels traded at the store. Days you'll hate the wind but love the company, he says. Isaiah considers a stockyard job by the rails. Good pay, bad noise, nights in a Rio bed. Amos threatens to join a minstrel of rodeo tents and rope tricks. 5 minutes later he swears he'd rather be bored than applauded. King claims he'll cook wherever a crew is hungry and quiet in the morning. The trail boss, for his part, rubs his jaw and scans the map again. Leaders always read weather. These days the barometer is printed on paper. Joke 2 shows up at a crossroads where 3 fences meet and a signboard reads "No trespassing" in letters a cow can't read. Amos taps it with his finger. Good news, he announces. The herd is illiterate. You angle the point steers through the legal gap anyway, because you're still more diplomat than rebel. Toward evening, you pass the burned rectangle of an old line shack, roof fallen in. Wire spool rusting like a lost bracelet in the weeds. A pair of meadowlarks on the ridgepole. Your mare pricks her ears at a scrap of stovepipe and sidesteps. Easy, girl, you murmur, and she settles, remembering older dangers that made more noise. Mainstream fact, small and stubborn. The work didn't vanish with the wire. It changed uniforms. Black cowboys hired on as ranch hands, line riders, stockyard men, railroad wranglers, and increasingly, rodeo performers. Their names appear in payrolls and prize lists, even when history books didn't print them. They taught colts, doctored calves, mended what weather and hooves unmade, and sang to herds that now slept behind somebody's legal claim to grass.at camp. King stirs a pot he calls fence stew, everything trimmed to fit, meat and potatoes squared off by his knife. Tastes the same, he declares, even if it looks tidy. He slides you a bowl. It's good, which is confusing, and you eat it anyway. Joke 3 is built in, Amos says he prefers his stew unruly, then asks for seconds. Night folds down with new sounds. Somewhere off to the southeast a locomotive blows a lonesome note that fades into the dark like a story that can't remember its last line. A coyote answers, unimpressed by schedules. The herd sleeps inside a pocket of wire you opened and shut under the trail boss's eye, and you lie back on your bedroll trying to decide whether the stars look closer when someone draws lines under them. You think of the old rhythm, lullaby songs, long rivers, a horizon that promised work without appointments, and of the new one, with gates to count and maps to obey. The breath that leaves you isn't a sigh so much as a measure. What's lost against what's spared, what's fenced out against what's finally safe. Your mare settles near your feet and snorts softly, as if to say that grass is still grass and morning still comes in one color at a time. Sleep finds you with that thought in your pocket. The trail is shorter now, but the day will still ask for hands and horses and jokes that keep the coffee honest. Whatever the maps decide, you'll rise to saddle leather and sky and make a line from here to there that no one can print on paper. Morning rolls in under a thin haze, the lights slow to spill over the cottonwoods. You hear the chuck wagon before you see it, King rattling a tin lid in the rhythm he uses to wake the camp without quite yelling. You sit up in your bedroll, the smell of frying salt pork drifting in with the breeze. The trail boss has been quieter lately, not brooding so much as weighing things, and when he calls the crew together you know it isn't just about today's miles. Town's 2 days off, he says. Railhead's not much farther. After that, boys, you'll be finding your own next trail. No one's surprised. The herd's nearly where it needs to be, and the times are what they are. Mainstream fact. The early 20th century Hollywood Western almost entirely erased the image of black cowboys. Studios and pulp novels leaned hard into a simplified myth. Lone white heroes, sanitized saloons, and trails scrubbed of the diversity that real drives had. By the 1930s, the idea of a black cowboy in popular culture was so rare that audiences often assumed it was an invention when it appeared. You ride out with that thought in your head, the herd moving like a slow, breathing tide in front of you. Elijah sidles up, Daisy tossing her head at the flies. Ever think about what stories they'll tell when we're dust? He asks. You shrug. Probably shorter, louder ones. He grins, but it doesn't quite reach his eyes. Quirky tidbit. Some cowboys kept small tin-type portraits of themselves taken in trail towns, sometimes in their real work clothes, sometimes in gaudy rented gear for the sake of the picture. Those images, now scattered in attics and archives, show a wider range of faces than the movies ever did. In the early afternoon, the herd moves through a patch of wild sunflowers, their heads bobbing in the wind. Amos starts humming a tune and makes up a verse about being the prettiest man in Chisholm. Isaiah snorts and asks if the flowers were the ones voting. Historians still argue whether the erasure of black cowboys was deliberate racism from the entertainment industry or just the inertia of a narrative that had already been whitewashed by dime novels before cameras rolled. Either way, the result left generations with a distorted view of who rode the range. By the time you stop to water the herd, the sky has gone a pale, washed-out blue. You lean on the saddle horn, watching the cattle crowd the stream. Elijah rides past, lifting his hat briefly, as if saluting the day itself. Joke one happens when Amos leans toward you and says, "If Hollywood wrote this scene, we'd all be clean-shaven, playing cards, and about to fight over a mysterious stranger." You glance at your dust-caked boots and shake your head. Guess we'll have to disappoint them. In the last miles before camp, the ground levels out, the grass giving way to hard-packed earth scattered with wagon ruts. You pass an old stagecoach stop, a sagging porch, paint long gone, a sign so faded you can barely read the word hotel. It's easy to imagine the stories that might have started here and ended very differently in someone else's telling. Quirky tidbit again. Traveling photographers sometimes staged cowboy shots in such locations, hiring locals to pose with borrowed saddles and props 6-shooters. Some of those images, mislabeled over the years, have been used in textbooks as if they were real working trail hands. At camp that night, the talk turns to what's next. Elijah's considering work with a horse trader. Isaiah's been offered a spot with a ranch that runs cattle only a day's ride from his sister's place. Amos claims he'll join a traveling medicine show. Just for the stories. King listens, stirring a pot of beans, and says nothing about his own plans. Mainstream fact again. In recent decades, historians and community groups have worked to recover and publicize the stories of black cowboys through oral histories, museum exhibits, and local rodeos that honor their contributions. This shift has begun to correct the myth, though the work is slow. Joke 2 slips in when Amos, poking the fire with a stick, says, "When they write my story, I hope they leave out the time I fell asleep in the saddle." Elijah grins. "Too late. I've been telling that one for years." The night grows cooler. You stretch out on your bedroll, watching the sparks drift upward like lazy fireflies. Somewhere beyond camp, a coyote calls, the sound threading itself between the low murmurs of the herd. Joke 3 comes from King as he douses the fire. "If Hollywood wants me, they'll have to pay extra for the beans recipe." You ask if that's negotiable. He grins in the dark. "Nope." You close your eyes with the knowledge that tomorrow will be one of the last long days, the trail narrowing not because of fences now, but because of history itself, shrinking what was once wide open into whatever fits between the covers of a story. The next morning breaks soft and cool, the sky brushed with the faintest pink, like someone dipped their thumb in watercolor and smudged it across the horizon. The herd moves out slow, as if they, too, know the road ahead is short. You can see the faint line of the town's water tower in the distance. A promise and a farewell all in one. The trail boss rides point with his hat pulled low. The wagon creaks behind, King humming something that's more rhythm than tune. Elijah rides up beside you, Daisy's ears flicking toward the scent of bread from some unseen bakery on the wind. "End of the line," he says quietly. You nod, because there's not much else to say. Mainstream fact, the era of the great cattle drives lasted only about 2 decades, from the late 1860s to the mid-1880s, before railroads, barbed wire, and changing markets reshaped the work. Yet in that short span, thousands of African American cowboys rode the trails, their skill and labor shaping the West as surely as any more celebrated figure. As you crest a low ridge, the town unfolds, rails siding, stockyards, and the low sprawl of buildings hugging the tracks. The smell of coal smoke and cattle blends in the warm morning air. A whistle blows, sharp and impatient, and a freight train eases forward in a sigh of steam. Quirky tidbit. Some cowboys timed their arrivals to match trains heading east, so they could load the cattle and be paid within hours. Others lingered a day or two, spending their wages in saloons, eating fresh bread, or, if they were lucky, sleeping in a real bed. The herd is split into pens, the noise sudden and layered, lowing, boots on planks, shouted counts. You hold your reins and watch the tallyman at work, his pencil scratching quick figures on a pad. The trail boss gives a final nod as the last gate swings shut. Historians still argue whether the cowboy's image is more myth than truth. What's certain is that the myth left out far too much, faces and names that were there in the dust and the dawn, working the same hours for the same pay, carving out freedom in a world that often pretended not to see them. Joke 1 comes from Amos, who leans on the fence and says, "That's it. We walk 'em here and they just stand around." King answers, "Welcome to retirement for cows." You take a slow walk through town, past the saloon with its batwing doors, past the general store displaying bright bolts of cloth and neatly stacked cans. A small photo studio sits near the depot, a sign outside reading, "Tintypes, Cowboys 10 cents. Isaiah pauses, grins, and says, "Might as well let the future wonder what we looked like." Quirky tidbit again. Rodeo and Wild West show promoters often hired real cowboys, black, native, Mexican, to pose for publicity photos. The irony was that the pictures sometimes gave them more fame than the work ever had. By late afternoon, the crew drifts toward the hotel or boarding house they've chosen. Saddles are stacked, bedrolls unrolled, boots lined up by doors. Elijah pats Daisy's neck and murmurs something that's not for anyone else's ears. The trail boss counts envelopes, calling each man's name. When yours is handed over, the weight feels both light and earned. Mainstream fact again, even after the great drives ended, many black cowboys stayed in ranching or horse work, passing on their skills to younger hands. Their presence never truly disappeared from the West, even if the spotlight moved elsewhere. Joke 2 shows up as king, now free of cooking duty, settles into a chair on the boardwalk. "Tomorrow," he declares, "I'm sleeping until the coffee makes itself." Amos laughs. "So, noon?" Evening settles in, the rail yard quieting except for the hiss of cooling engines. The air is thick with the scent of pine from fresh sawn boards somewhere down the street. Stars begin to prick the sky above the rooftops, the same stars that hung over the trail every night before this one. Joke 3 comes as Isaiah eyes the saloon's sign and says, "Bet they've got a poker table." Elijah smirks. "Bet it's just another kind of cattle pen." You stand at the edge of town, looking past the stockyards toward the open land beyond. Fences will keep carving it up, rail lines will keep pulling it in, but the memory of those miles, hot days, cold nights, the smell of coffee at dawn, and the low hum of a herd, will stay with you. The day has ended, and with it, this journey. You let your mind wander back to the trail, not to the fences or the rail yards, but to the places where the grass moved in long, gentle waves and the air was as wide as the sky. Think of the slow rhythm of hooves, the warmth of a horse's flank under your knee, the quiet satisfaction of a herd settled for the night. The campfire's glow fades in your memory until it's just a warm spot against the cool dark. You can almost hear the soft murmur of the crew, voices blending with the whisper of wind through cottonwoods. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls, low, unhurried, as if reminding you that the night has its own steady pace. Breathe deeply. The dust, the scent of leather, the faint sweetness of sage, let them all drift past like clouds over the prairie. The trail is behind you now, the work done. All that's left is the comfort of knowing the road was ridden, the job finished, and the story remembered. The herd is quiet, the stars steady above. You lie back in your bedroll one more time, the earth firm beneath you, the horizon folded neatly into sleep. Each breath grows slower, each thought softer, until you are simply part of the stillness. Let the last image be of that wide, open sky, unbroken, stretching from here to forever, holding you gently until morning.